My sister-in-law scoffed when I refused to give up my inheritance until my lawyer stepped in. Her face went pale as the truth came out, and suddenly, everyone saw her greed. She tried to play the victim, but it was too late. The damage was done. What happened next left her speechless, and I walked away knowing justice had been served. This is a long and complicated situation, but I'll try to keep it relevant. I, F32, ended my long-term relationship with my partner, M33, just before COVID. During lockdown, we continued living together and remained housemates even after restrictions were lifted, as we generally got along and had an 11-year-old daughter to raise. For the past 3 years, we've strictly been co-parents and roommates. One day, my ex was supposed to take our daughter shopping for school clothes, but she returned home in tears just 10 minutes later. She explained that they were on their way to the store when his new girlfriend called, and he immediately turned the car around, dropped her off, and went to see his girlfriend instead. To make matters worse, he asked our daughter to lie to me about it. She refused, revealing that she'd been covering for him for a while. When he got home, we had a huge argument. I didn't mind that he was dating. I was upset that he felt the need to sneak around, which led to him treating both me and our daughter poorly. I told him that if he had just been upfront about his new relationship and introduced us, maybe we could have all gotten along. Instead, he acted immaturely. The argument ended with him moving out to live with his parents. A few days later, he called to apologize, saying he wanted to do things right and hoped we could be friends for the sake of our daughter. I was hopeful that we could finally co-parent peacefully. Now, here's where I might be in the wrong. I've always been close to my ex's parents. Even after our breakup, they continued inviting me over for dinner, saying that, regardless of my relationship with their son, I was still their grandchild's mother and part of the family. One evening, while my daughter was at my ex's parents' house, she texted me, inviting me over for dinner because they were making my favorite meal. Assuming everyone was fine with it, I went over without hesitation. At dinner, it was just me, my daughter, and my ex's parents. My ex only came upstairs briefly to grab 2 plates of food before returning downstairs. When I asked his mom about it, she said his girlfriend wasn't feeling well. I thought nothing of it, assuming I'd meet her another time. I had a pleasant evening, helped clean up, and even promised to bring a coconut cake for my ex's father before heading home with my daughter. Later, my ex bombarded me with messages, accusing me of being rude and inappropriate for showing up uninvited. He claimed I made his girlfriend feel unwelcome and caused issues in their relationship because she now believed he and I might still have feelings for each other. According to him, exes don't do that, it's creepy. I spoke to my daughter and gently asked if she had checked with everyone before inviting me. She admitted she didn't realize she needed to since it had never been an issue before. I didn't tell her about her dad's reaction or blame her. She's a child and shouldn't be caught in the middle. Instead, I apologized to my ex for making things awkward, explaining that I thought he wanted us all to be friends and saw this as a step in that direction. He insisted that after this, his girlfriend would never want to be my friend. I never intended to make anyone uncomfortable, but I can't help but feel that if the roles were reversed, if he brought his girlfriend into my home without warning, I would be uncomfortable too. Update. Hey, everyone. I recently saw a post here about the lack of updates on submitted stories and figured I'd share mine, even though it's a sad one. I also need to vent a little about this situation. I'll put it under the cut to avoid cluttering people's dashboards. For clarity, my ex's new girlfriend will be Kim, my ex's father will be FIL, and my ex's mother will be MIL. I'll start from the day after the dinner and summarize the key events. The morning after, I kept my promise and brought FIL the coconut cake. However, wanting to avoid any tension, I texted ahead instead of just dropping by like I normally would. When I arrived, FIL met me on the porch instead of inviting me in, which was unusual. His tone was polite but distant, and his body language made it clear that he was subtly pushing me away. It hurt to see someone who had always treated me like a daughter now acting so cold, but I didn't question it, I just left. Over the next couple of weeks, the distance from my ex-in-laws only grew. They had always been more than just family to me, they were close friends. I used to take MIL to her doctor's appointments and on shopping trips, but my texts checking in or inviting her out went unanswered. FIL and I used to go fishing and go-karting together, but those outings suddenly stopped. I started to suspect that my ex was behind this shift in their behavior. At the same time, I noticed changes in my daughter. Since my ex and I were never legally married, there was no formal custody arrangement. She would simply text whichever parent she wanted to be with. She had always been a daddy's girl and typically spent more time at her dad's place, which I was fine with. But after that dinner, she started staying home with me more often. Then one day, she went to her dad's house, only to call me within an hour, crying and asking me to pick her up. On the way home, I gently reminded her that she could talk to me about anything, no matter how difficult. I acknowledged that adjusting to her dad's relationship with Kim would be challenging, but reassured her that if she was struggling, I'd help her through it. That's when she finally opened up and shared her perspective on everything that had been happening with her dad and Kim. My ex and Kim had been dating for about 6 months before my daughter told me, and she pretty much knew about it from the beginning. My ex told her she couldn't tell me about it, and she agreed because she didn't want us to fight. My ex also had Kim around my daughter from the beginning, and my daughter was wary of her at first but started to like her. So the people saying I should meet Kim before she was around my daughter, that ship unfortunately sailed long ago. The day after the dinner, Mil texted my daughter and basically said, "You're not in any trouble, but don't mention your mom around Kim again." My daughter texted back asking why, and she said, "It's just easier not to upset her." Kim started doing all the things with my ex-in-laws I used to do. She took Mil to doctor's appointments, she took Mil shopping, she went fishing with Phil and tried to replicate my coconut cake. My daughter tried talking to her dad and said it felt like Kim was trying to replace me, and my dad just said, "She's just being their daughter-in-law, your mother isn't their daughter-in-law anymore." Still, my daughter is stubborn and insisted it wasn't fair that her mother was being excluded from the family. Her dad just kept repeating, "She's not family," to which my daughter yelled, "She's my mom. That makes her more family than Kim." At that moment, Kim got up and left the room, and my ex immediately ran after her. But she didn't just step out, she grabbed her keys, got in her car, and drove off. My ex followed her in his own car, leaving my daughter behind. Meanwhile, Mil and Phil began scolding my daughter, insisting that she owed Kim an apology when she returned. That's when my daughter, in tears, called me and begged me to come pick her up. She's adamant that she won't go back until they apologize to her, and honestly, I don't blame her. I'm completely at a loss over all of this. My ex never had an issue with me being close to his parents after our breakup. In fact, I was the one who stayed by Mil's side in the hospital for 4 months after her heart attack and subsequent surgery in 2021. I was the one taking her to doctor's appointments, managing her medications, and helping her through physical therapy. I cooked meals for Phil every night because neither he nor my ex knew how to cook for themselves. I also cleaned their house for over a year while Mil recovered, all because I cared about them, not just as my child's grandparents but as dear friends. I don't know if my ex always felt this way and just hid it, or if Kim's influence played a role in this sudden shift. I suspect it's a bit of both. My ex has mastered the art of weaponized incompetence, and now that he has someone new to take care of him and his aging parents, he no longer sees a need for me in their lives. That's where things stand now. For the past month, I've been met with complete silence from people I once considered family, and my daughter has been pushed aside until she finally broke down and came home in tears. As much as this situation hurts me, it breaks my heart even more to see my daughter suffering because of it. Additional comment from Oop. I appreciate your perspective. It's only been a couple of days since my daughter called me in tears, and she's been keeping herself busy with school and friends, so I haven't had a chance to sit down with her and fully talk through her feelings about everything. The only thing I've asked her so far is whether she wants me to let her know if her dad tries to call, and she said yes, she wants to know if he reaches out. She's been attending monthly online therapy sessions since her dad and I broke up, but given the recent events, the first thing I did was contact her therapist and arrange an emergency in-person session as soon as possible. Several people have suggested that I get a lawyer and establish a formal custody agreement, and honestly, I'm a little embarrassed that it hadn't crossed my mind. My ex has an almost irrational fear of anything involving the court. He once had a full-blown panic attack over receiving a jury duty letter. Because of that, part of me believes he'd never take this to court. But at the same time, I barely recognize the person he's become, and I refuse to take any chances. I'll be looking into getting a lawyer as soon as possible to see if I can secure an emergency custody order that ensures she doesn't have to return to his home until a formal custody arrangement is in place. Relevant comments. Anonymous. Your Mil seems to enable her son's incompetence. Honestly, I'm wondering why you allowed your daughter to be around that environment in the first place. Oop. Oh, believe me, this was a constant source of frustration. I've been with my ex since high school, and his mother used to subtly suggest that I should spoil her baby boy like he deserves. But over time, she seemed to realize that I wasn't someone who could be pushed around. It's been years since she's tried to tell me how to manage my household or raise my child. My daughter is just as stubborn as I am. She's fully aware that her grandmother holds very traditional views about a woman's role in the home, and she finds those ideas ridiculous. She has no problem telling Mil that to her face. To be fair, I've never seen Mil try to guilt her or make her feel inferior for disagreeing. For a long time, I thought Mil might have actually admired my daughter's strong-willed nature, maybe even wishing she had been like that in her own youth. But now? I'm not so sure what's really going through her mind. Update. I genuinely didn't expect to provide another update. Over the past few months, I hired a lawyer and worked through custody arrangements with my ex. At first, it was tense, but things eventually settled. I won't go into too much detail since this situation is more about him than me, and at the end of the day, he's still my daughter's father. So, here's the short version. When my lawyer first reached out to my ex, he flooded my phone with calls and messages, accusing me of trying to take our daughter and drain him financially. He kept saying he would never do something like this to me and couldn't believe I was doing it to him. I shut that down immediately, making it clear that I wasn't after his money. I just wanted legal assurance that our existing arrangement, our daughter primarily staying with me but free to visit him, remained in place. He insisted lawyers weren't necessary because he had no intention of taking her away, but I stood firm, and eventually, he relented. At the same time, my daughter and I had our own issues to work through. I had to come to terms with the fact that I played a part in her emotional distress. When I first broke up with my ex, I reassured her that nothing would change. Even when he moved out, I kept telling her that things would stay the same, that I'd still be involved with her grandparents, that we'd still visit them together. While I meant well, I didn't prepare her for the reality that families evolve, and change doesn't have to be a bad thing. She held on to the idea that her family dynamic would remain the same, so when Kim entered the picture, that illusion began to break down. But change is natural, it's even healthy. I may not like being cut off from my ex's parents, but they're not wrong for drawing that boundary. They're also not wrong for trying to welcome the new woman in their son's life. It hurts, but life moves forward. Now, my daughter visits her dad about once or twice a week, following a set of rules we all agreed on. She decides when she visits. Her dad can invite her, but she has the right to say no, and he can't pressure her. She isn't required to interact with her grandparents or Kim if she doesn't want to. She won't be taken anywhere unless she agrees. If anyone makes her uncomfortable, she's free to leave, walk to Diane's house, a coworker of mine who lives 3 blocks away and has known my daughter since she was a baby, and call me for a ride. So far, this arrangement has been working well. Everyone has been treating her kindly, though no one has actually apologized for their behavior. Still, she seems happier during her visits. Eventually, she asked if she could attend Phil's birthday party since her aunt, uncle, and cousins would be visiting from out of state. I agreed. Then, tonight, she came home with quite a story. The party was going great, everyone was enjoying themselves, and her older cousin was teaching her how to play the Nintendo 64. Kim was nowhere in sight, claiming once again that she wasn't feeling well. My ex went downstairs to check on her. Suddenly, everyone heard him shouting, "Where is it? What did you do with it?" The entire room went silent as he stormed upstairs, demanding that everyone empty their pockets. Money had gone missing from his parents' safe. For some context, this safe is locked under the stairs and needs a key and combination to get into it. It has important documents for the whole family and emergency cash in it. Mil, my ex, and now Kim are the only ones who know the combination, and the only key is hidden in Phil and Mil's room. My ex went downstairs to check on Kim and she was asleep in bed, but the door to the cupboard under the stairs was open. He got a bad feeling and checked the safe and about $2,000 was missing. He woke Kim up and she cried and said she had been asleep the whole time and someone must have come down and stole the money while she was sleeping. I was pretty gratified to hear that my ex's family are nowhere near as naive as he is, and immediately tore into him for believing that lie. None of them had a key or knew the combination, and all of them had been hanging out in the living room. Kim cleans Phil and Mil's room all the time and knew where the key was. He told Kim the combination. Kim was downstairs the whole time. Kim is the only person who could have done it. He initially tried to defend Kim, insisting that everyone leave her alone. However, Phil stood his ground, telling his son to either find the missing money or he would call the police to handle it. My ex went back downstairs to confront Kim, and everyone upstairs could hear her crying and hurling insults at him. Moments later, she stormed outside to get into her car, with my ex following behind. And there, sitting in her back seat, was a bag stuffed full of cash, a bag that hadn't been there just hours earlier. Realizing what was happening, my ex tried to stop Kim from leaving, but she sped out of the driveway like a bat out of hell. Now, Phil and Mil are absolutely furious and want to press charges, while my ex is desperately pleading with them not to, claiming he can convince her to return the money. I have no idea where this situation is headed next, but honestly, I'm just relieved that my ex and Kim never took me up on my original offer to be friends, because, holy shit. TLDR, I now have sole custody of my daughter, though my ex still has visitation rights. She's been in therapy, and he's been going out of his way to regain her trust. I've completely distanced myself from his family, which was hard for my daughter at first, but she's adjusting. Today, December 11th, 23, was my ex-FIL's birthday, and my daughter went to celebrate with her dad's family. During the party, money went missing and was later found in Kim's car, but she managed to get away with it. Update. Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last update. To be honest, I took a step back after a friend randomly came across my story on their Facebook feed. It was nerve-wracking enough sharing personal details on Tumblr, but realizing my posts were being spread all over the internet, where people I actually know could see them, was overwhelming. Plus, since this situation no longer directly involves me, I wasn't sure if an update was even necessary. But since things have mostly wrapped up, I figured I'd give one final update with everything I've learned. Apologies in advance, this is long, but I've added headers to make it easier to skip to what interests you. TLDR, my ex got the stolen money back from Kim, and she moved out. I later found out a lot of things about her that I hadn't known before. Then, just 2 weeks later, she and my ex got back together. Kim is still acting strangely when it comes to me and doesn't want me around FIL and MIL, which has upset my daughter. The rest of the family called her out on it, and now she barely speaks to any of them. After the party, I didn't pressure my daughter to share more details about what happened with Kim, but she told me on her own that my ex found Kim the next day. She had only spent $50 of the stolen money, which she repaid, and he returned the rest to FIL and MIL. They ultimately decided not to press charges. However, Kim was banned from their house, which led to her and my ex breaking up. Almost a week later on December 17, 23, I got an unexpected call from MIL, the first since August. She started by apologizing for being out of touch and invited me over. This time, I made sure to ask who would be there, and she assured me it was just her and FIL, my ex was at work. I hesitated, saying I didn't want to come over if it would upset my ex, but she dismissed my concern, saying, "To hell with him, it's my house, and I invited you." So that evening, I went over. When I arrived, FIL was glued to the TV and just gave me a quick nod. MIL led me into the kitchen for a private conversation. She apologized again for keeping her distance and revealed that it was actually my ex's idea to cut ties with me, not hers or FIL's. When I asked why, since this had never been an issue before, she explained that he didn't want to upset Kim. Apparently, everyone in the house had been walking on eggshells around her. MIL described Kim as someone who could be perfectly sweet and friendly, but the moment something didn't go her way, she'd storm out, jump in her car, and swear she was never coming back. She also shared a lot of things about Kim that I had never known. Things my daughter was too young to notice or question. Things I now know about Kim. Kim is 52, as I mentioned before on this blog, and has 3 grown children. She was living with her oldest son when she met my ex, but after about 8.5 months of them dating, her son kicked her out and she had nowhere to stay, so she moved in with FIL and MIL and my ex. Why? She's a drug user. MIL knows Kim was on drugs because she admitted it to FIL. FIL is a retired cop and noticed strange behavior from Kim, like sudden bursts of energy followed by collapsing in a dead sleep, mood swings and irritability, coming and going at odd hours of the night, etc. FIL confronted both her and my ex with this information and they admitted she was addicted to drugs, but insisted she was getting treatment for it. Apparently, that's actually how Kim and my ex met. My ex is a recovered alcoholic, was never brought up until now because it wasn't relevant to the situation until now. It was really bad when we were young, but I assumed he had been sober since 2015. Unbeknownst to me, he had slipped back into his drinking habit sometime in later 2022 when we were still living together. I was there for him when he was at his worst and can say with 100% certainty he wasn't acting as bad as he was back then, but he did stay out late a lot and always seemed tired. I just assumed he was working late, or hanging out with friends, or hooking up with women. We weren't a couple at that point and I felt it wasn't any of my business what he spent his nights doing as long as it didn't affect our daughter, and at that point I didn't believe it was. Fortunately, he realized on his own he needed to stop before he spiraled too far out of control, and recognized he could not stop on his own. He joined a local drug and alcohol addiction program, and that's where he met Kim. They were in different programs, but those programs were in the same building. They ran into each other by chance, hit it off, and started dating. Apparently my ex even confessed to trying Kim's drug of choice, but swore up and down he was a recreational user only and wasn't addicted. MIL and FIL said Kim could only stay with them if Kim continued treatment and any and all drug usage in their house stopped, and my ex and Kim agreed. Then the party happened, and MIL clarified a few things about that for me. Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last update. To be honest, I stepped back from sharing too much here after a friend unexpectedly came across my story on Facebook. It was nerve-wracking enough sharing personal details on Tumblr, but realizing that my experiences were being circulated online without my knowledge, and that people I knew in real life were reading them, was overwhelming. On top of that, this whole situation no longer directly involves me, so I wasn't sure if I should even post an update. But now that things have settled, I figured I'd share a final update with everything I've learned. This is a long one, packed with context I didn't have before. I've added headers to make it easier to skim through if you're only interested in certain parts. TLDR, my ex got his money back from Kim, and she moved out. I found out a lot about her that I hadn't known before. Then, just 2 weeks later, my ex got back together with her. Kim still acts strange about me and doesn't want me around my former in-laws, which has upset my daughter. The family called her out on it, and now she barely speaks to any of them. What happened at the party? That day, when my ex went downstairs to check on Kim, he immediately noticed she was under the influence, so he decided to put her to bed. On the way to their room, he saw that the door under the stairs, usually locked, was slightly open. After settling Kim in, he checked inside but didn't notice anything off at first. Still, he felt uneasy and decided to open the safe to make sure everything was there. At this point, I interrupted and asked why Kim even had the combination. My ex told MIL it was in case of an emergency, and MIL admitted she regretted agreeing to that. They usually keep $10,000 in cash in the safe for emergencies, but when my ex counted the money twice, he realized $2,000 was missing. Panicked, he woke Kim up, demanding to know where it went. She denied taking it. He didn't want to expose that she was high at his parents' house, so he initially pretended she had been asleep the whole time and instead accused the rest of the family. However, everyone pointed out that Kim was the only one who could have accessed it. Realizing he had no choice but to confront her, he went back downstairs. Kim became defensive, claiming she was scared because he had shaken her and yelled in her face for no reason. When he kept pressing, she grabbed a bag, threw some clothes inside, and stormed out to her car. As she threw the bag into the back seat, some of its contents spilled out, revealing stacks of cash rubber banded together, just like the money in the safe. My ex tried to open the car door, but she had already locked it and sped off. The next day, he found her parked outside her eldest son's apartment. She had asked to stay with him, but he refused, so she spent the night in her car. She broke down, admitting she hadn't attended her treatment program in weeks and had taken the money to pay off some dangerous people she owed. My ex demanded she return it. She handed over everything except for $50, which she promised to pay back within a week, or else he'd call the police. A few hours later, she did. Shortly after, Kim and her daughter came back to MIL and FIL's house to collect her remaining belongings, just days before MIL called me. What happened next? As Christmas approached, MIL and FIL resumed contact with me, nearly as frequently as they had before Kim entered the picture. I was polite but maintained some distance. MIL even hinted at wanting me to come clean their house at one point, but I proudly redirected her to a cleaning service instead. Meanwhile, my daughter remained close to them and was hopeful I'd spend Christmas at their house like every year. I gently told her that might be awkward, but she insisted it wouldn't be. Kim was gone, after all. She was especially worried that if I didn't go, I'd be alone for Christmas, and in her mind, that was unacceptable. Then, on Christmas Eve, my ex unexpectedly texted me, saying he needed to talk. When he arrived, he dropped the bombshell. He and Kim were back together. Kim's back. He explained that Kim had apologized for stealing the money and claimed she had only intended to use it temporarily, planning to replace it before anyone noticed. He believed she was genuinely sorry and wanted to give her another chance to prove she had changed. I stayed quiet, but my daughter, bless her heart, immediately asked, "You really believe that?" My ex looked irritated but continued, saying Kim had already apologized to MIL and FIL and now wanted to make amends with our daughter. He invited her to dinner with them so Kim could apologize in person. My daughter was visibly uncomfortable, so I reassured her that she could make whatever decision felt right, and I would support her. To his credit, my ex did the same, saying he wouldn't force her. She ultimately declined but said she might reconsider later. Then, she brought up Christmas and asked if I could still come over. My ex's face fell. He admitted that Kim wouldn't be comfortable with me there. My daughter lost it. And honestly, I did too, internally. Kim had literally stolen from the family at a party just weeks ago. She hadn't made amends in any meaningful way. Yet she was welcome, and I wasn't? My ex insisted that the decision had already been made, and my daughter's reaction wouldn't change anything. After a heated exchange, he left. The texts. That night, my daughter started receiving texts from family members. First, MIL messaged her, saying she was disappointed that she was causing drama on Christmas Eve. She pointed out that everyone else had agreed to tolerate Kim for the holiday and implied my daughter should do the same. While she was reading that, another text came in from her aunt, "Shame on you. I can't believe how you spoke to your father." Realizing her dad had likely twisted the story to make her look bad, my daughter spiraled. She was just 12 years old, and her own family was ganging up on her. I know I've made mistakes in this situation. I know I've been naive. But I've never tried to turn my daughter against her father. I've constantly reminded her that he loves her and wants the best for her. But this? I couldn't talk him out of this one. She begged me not to make her go over for Christmas, terrified of facing the family without knowing what her dad had told them about her. Of course, I reassured her that she didn't have to. I texted my ex to let him know she didn't feel safe coming over. He never responded to me, but my daughter's phone blew up with messages. Eventually, she had to block most of her family just to get some peace and cried herself to sleep that night. Since then, since Christmas Eve, I haven't pushed my daughter to reach out to her father. He has called her a few times, but she only gives short, one- or two-word answers. She no longer wants to visit him. He's accused me of turning her against him, but it's easy to shut that down. Would you want to talk to someone who twists everything you say? To your own family? I have no idea what's going on with Kim, MIL, or FIL anymore, and I don't care. My only priority now is helping my daughter regain the loud, stubborn, boisterous spirit she once had. It's slow, but therapy is helping. And more than anything, I'm so grateful I secured that custody arrangement when I did.